Good morning and welcome to the JCI Milestone Awards Series. I'm Julie Saba from the Department of Pediatrics at UCSF, and my guest today is Dr. Ann Chahroudi, recipient of the 2025 Marian W. Ropes Award, which recognizes the significant scholarly achievements of a middle career woman physician scientist. Dr. Chahroudi is tenured professor and vice chair for basic science and career development in the Department of Pediatrics at Emory School of Medicine. She's founding director of the Pediatric Residency Investigative Scholars at Emory, or PRIZE program, and she serves as the co-director of the Emory Center for AIDS Research. She's also co-PI for the Pediatric Adolescent Virus Elimination Collaboratory. This NIH-funded collaboratory is the only one out of 10 that is focused on curing pediatric HIV and is made up of over 35 investigators in 5 countries. Dr. Chahroudi has actively worked to create an inclusive environment that supports the success of individuals from diverse backgrounds. Dr. Chahroudi received the Ropes Award in recognition of her contributions to the development of novel pediatric models of postnatal HIV and Zika virus infections and persistence. Following her passion to eliminate HIV, her team has used macaque models to identify the sources of persistent infection, to define the anatomical origin of viral rebound, and to test novel cures and approaches. She has received a Merit Award in 2021 for her research. Her contributions have been instrumental in shaping research agendas and policies that impact pediatric and infectious diseases research globally. Dr. Chahroudi, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today and sharing some of your personal perspectives on your research and your own career.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was a very, very kind introduction. It's really great to be here with you.
It's great to be with you as well. I'm going to ask you a few questions and take as much time as you like. My first question is, how did you come to focus on your own area of research?
So for me, my field is infectious diseases. My passion really centers around HIV research. And it actually started all the way back in high school. And so I really trace it back to a weekend that I spent in high school doing a teen peer AIDS education workshop with the Red Cross. And it was just kind of something I signed up for, not really understanding a whole lot about it, but HIV was a really, a big deal, obviously, in the late 80s and early 90s and in the news, and it still is a major problem, but at that time when there were really no effective treatments, and it was still kind of a lot was being learned about the etiology of AIDS as a disease, and all of the different manifestations. It was kind of a scary time, I would say, to be a teenager and to be thinking about, going out in the world with this virus. But what really struck me the most and has stuck with me, all these years is there was a man who was living with HIV and had AIDS at that time who came and spoke with us, and just kind of hearing his perspective and hearing what he was living with and facing was very, very powerful. And that's sort of what set me on the initial trajectory to study HIV. I initially was sort of thinking I was going to be focused more on the vaccine side of things, and then have moved into cure as the years have evolved. But I think, it still makes a lot of impact on me today when we talk with our community advisory board members or other folks that are living with HIV or affected by HIV, whether they had a parent with HIV or are living with it themselves. That is what I think is the main driver of my passion for this research.
Thank you for that. Your answer actually resonated so much with me. I got to say, when I'm older than you, and when I was in medical school, my internal medicine practicum, my oral test for internal medicine was to examine a young man in his 20s who had hepatosplenomegaly and lymphadenopathy. And I went through a list, and this was 1985 or 1984.
Mm-hmm.
I went through scores of diagnoses, possible diagnoses for this, and I did not come up with the right answer, but I got honors. And the teacher, my instructor said, "This is not in your textbooks. This is a new disease. You're going to need to know it. It's called HIV." And so a lot has happened since then. So anyway, it's just amazing. So moving on, what factors do you feel were most critical to your success in your own research?
I think there have been a lot of things that have played into it. And, some of it is personal and some of it is external, internal versus external factors. So I think, for anybody to be successful in research, you have to work hard, obviously, and you have to be determined and persevere in the face of failure, of which there is a lot in research. I think about my first few years as a junior faculty member and the number of grants I submitted and the number that I got initially from NIH was 0 for a few years.
You have to fail early and often, right?
Right. And I think, if you don't, I think that, there's this, I think for physician scientists, in some ways, you're used to kind of being the cream of the crop and at the top of the, top of the crowd. And when you get to that point, I think, some people, you just keep plugging along and keep submitting and keep revising and getting all the feedback that you can. And once you kind of break through, it sometimes seems like the world opens up to you. And then I think other people are, sort of fall away, get intimidated or get kind of, okay, well, maybe they give up a little too early, I think. And so, or maybe they just have a different, sort of a different career path that fits their passion. But at any rate, so being determined and persevering and, not giving up when you do initially have, a number of setbacks. I think sort of externally, the thing that when I think back to those early years that saved me and that I think I learned a lot from and also informed my research questions was being part of a couple of large teams of researchers that were doing program project grants and things like the PAVE Collaboratory that I'm now co-leading, because you get exposed to people from, all different institutions, different perspectives, and you also begin to build your network. So I think that team science aspect, it's important for scientists at all levels, but I think in particular, it's important for junior scientists that are starting out and trying to kind of learn the ropes of how to, how to conduct their research programs in a way, of course, you need to be funded to do so, but also, how to kind of pull out the most interesting and important questions. So those are, I think, determination and team science approaches. Those are two major things. I think I was really, while I was in that kind of phase of not quite getting all the grants that I submitted, Emory has a really great setup in terms of pilot awards. And so that was, I pretty much applied to every single one of those and was much more successful with those internal pilot awards. So I think that can really help when people are starting out, is to take advantage of those opportunities. And sometimes, doing non-human primate research as I do, individual pilot awards aren't often not sufficient to fund an animal study. So kind of cobbling together funds from different resources was a critical way to actually get the work done. And finally, I will say, I did have great support from my division and my department when I was starting out. I got a startup package that I was able to utilize for my lab and for technicians and things of that nature at the beginning, and equipment. And I think today, what I'm seeing is that's less and less common. People are getting startup packages, maybe, once they get an R01 or once they get something that is sort of more definitive. And I think that that's really, of course, financial resources now more than ever are constrained, but I think there are those individuals that really we just have to take the leap and invest in them early on. And then that is, I think, it sets them up for success a lot more than kind of this stringing along, sort of K-12, K-08, R, and then that's when you really sort of get the resources. I think that's much too late.
That's a very thorough and excellent response. And I liked a lot of what you said. And in my own experience, there was a period of time when I was not getting NIH awards and getting lots of pilots like you. And then it flipped. So that I think because people are trying to steer the pilots towards the younger investigators, I stopped being able to get the pilots and I started being able to get all the R1. So hopefully that happens with other people as well. I also appreciate very much your paying it forward in terms of lifting up the more junior people as you rise in your own career. Can you share any stories or any information about particular obstacles that you have faced, or maybe one situation or obstacle that you had to rise above?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think there's always obstacles. So I think for me, and this is a personal aspect of life, which is that having kids during the course of training, while it was great, and I wanted to do it for my for my family, and it was the right time in life. Of course, that sets up more challenges in terms of time management and your own sort of personal resources. So I don't think that they became an obstacle necessarily. That's just kind of another aspect of how to incorporate family research, and clinical care into this type of job that we've chosen. For me, when I had my daughter, I was in the end of my PhD, during my MD PhD, and then my first son was right at the end of MD PhD. So I ended up taking a year. I mean, it was planned, but I ended up taking a year off before applying for residency in general pediatrics. And so, one could say, oh, well, that's an obstacle, but, I think it was what was right for my family at the time. I ended up, being a stay-at-home mom for a period of that year, and then also working in a lab for a period of that year once I felt that I really needed to get out of the house. And then kind of went into internship and residency, and then had my last child, so my second son, after finishing residency, and so had another kind of quote unquote gap year of sorts too. I worked, I had my son, but I was working in our HIV clinic here in Atlanta, and working in a research lab, but it was in sort of one of those faculty positions that's a little bit nebulous, and hadn't started my fellowship. So all of these things are, I would say, I'm sort of talking about them to illustrate how the path doesn't have to be completely one, from A to B to C to D to get to a place where you need to go. I've given a talk to in a career development conference where I talk about my path as an example of some things were very, very slow, like the tortoise, and some things were a little bit faster, like the hare. So tortoise and the hare. And I think you just have to kind of map out your life and your career, and see how they intersect, and try to remove things that could be considered obstacles, and sort of create a path that works best for you. And I think that's what I did. I mean, I'm not pretending to say it wasn't hard and there weren't tears and things of that nature, but I think it's just having those extra sort of years built in and not having to race through everything once I finished the education part of training really helped me to be able to truly hit the ground running when I became a junior faculty member.
I totally appreciate that. Family and children definitely challenge your time management skills. I'm very happy that you managed to find a creative way to achieve all of your goals, personal and career as well. I wish I had had a little bit more of that myself. It was a different time when I was coming up, so I'm really happy to see that. I have not only read your papers, but I've seen some of your YouTube presentations, and one of them was from about 10 years ago where you were at a conference and predicting kind of things that were going to be, that you thought might happen in HIV work and clinical opportunities and clinical treatments, and they've actually come true, maybe even faster than you predicted. It was kind of amazing to see that. And I'm just wondering where you think your career is going now, and can you make some other predictions that will probably come true?
Well, that's interesting. I'd like to go back and watch that myself, actually. Um, so I think, obviously we're talking in a time of great upheaval, I would say, and lots of change, although it's still unclear how long this kind of change will be in effect. I doubt things will completely return to what you and I would probably call normal, but I think that there will be some kind of stabilization, I hope, and along those lines, I'm encouraging all of our trainees and junior faculty to just push forward, pursue what they're passionate about. Research will continue in the US, and it will be, I think, still a very exciting time to be here as a scientist. Looking to the future, in my field in particular, and our research, we've mostly been focusing on studying cure approaches in non-human primates, both in the adults, but more recently, much more focused on infant models. And we're really trying to not only test, kind of different interventions that have been sort of already tried in adults and just bringing them down to the infants, but to learn as much as we can about the developing immune system and how we might be able to specifically target persistent virus in the setting of that infant immune system, and how virus persistence can differ when you are a child or an infant compared to an adult. So I think we still have a lot to learn there, and that's where our focus has been and will continue to be. But I think one of the things that, with the advent of long-acting antiretroviral therapy, and I think, that might have been a prediction, and that's still kind of something that is being more, kind of rolled out for kids and tested for kids. And of course, the question of how available it will be on an international scale is still there. But thinking about how that may play into approaches to cure, and whether that's something, people will still desire a cure or not, if long-acting antiretroviral therapy is much more widely available. I think that's still an open question to me. I work with a group of scientists that are have been pursuing gene therapy for HIV control for many years, and it's really all their work, but they've been doing it as part of the PAVE Martin Delaney Collaboratory, and some of the research and the work in non-human primates has really been astounding, and it seems like this may be one approach that actually works a whole lot better in infants than it does in adults, and likely that relates back again to the more tolerant immune system. So I'm part of a team, like I mentioned before, that we are trying to move that slowly but surely towards the clinical trial. So I'll be really fascinated to see what the outcome of that is and how that might change the landscape of treatment for pediatric HIV.
That's so great. When I was a resident at Duke, my my head of pediatrics, Sam Katz, and Kathy Wilford were involved in some of the very first trials of antiretroviral to pregnant women to prevent the transmission to newborns. So it's really come such a long way. I just want to ask one extra question kind of on the theme that you mentioned, which is, would you like to share any thoughts about the unique challenges and maybe some advantages of working with pediatric populations and pediatric models when studying infectious disease and immunology problems? Because you're
Yeah,
pioneering that.
sure. I mean, I think that it is it's definitely can be a little bit challenging in terms of thinking about blood volumes and, and things when you want to do a big sort of assessment of the immunology. And you're dealing with a very tiny amount of blood and a small number of PBMCs, for example. But I think that from a clinical perspective, when the first time I did my pediatrics rotation, that's when I knew I wanted to be a pediatrician. I hadn't really gone into medical school thinking that, but it just was something that I thought, why would anyone want to do anything else? As soon as I started interacting with kids and their families. So I think that it's just one of those things that to me, it made so much sense to focus my research in that area as well. And I think that's something kind of as an aside, a lesson for everybody who is kind of in the plan and in the course of becoming a physician scientist. I think that the closer that you can link your clinical practice to your research, the better off you will be in the long run. The more you can you always think about your mission and you understand the why, and that is something that is always reinforced every time I go to clinic. But to get back to your question, I think that I'm not sure that I think it's fascinating to be thinking about the immunology, first of all, and how it changes. And I'm not really a specialist in terms of the maternal fetal interface, but everything I learn about it is really amazing. And so from what's going on in utero to in the neonatal period to, sort of as the immune system develops in infancy, and on into childhood. I think that is just so ripe for discovery and for, sort of to be able to do these longitudinal studies in the infant non-human primate model that we're doing, and then ideally translate those into the human setting. That to me is just such a fantastic opportunity. And we haven't done as many studies myself, I will say, in my lab with human samples, but I think that's an area that we are working with, in a bigger group, and also hoping to kind of do more of in the future. So there's always more to learn, and there's always more to, I think anytime you answer one question, it leads to 10 additional questions that we want to go after. I think you kind of also phrased the question in terms of kind of the world that we're in right now. And one thing that I think I've been interested in exploring, and I think a lot of people are, is sort of how to break out of the NIH funding model, only the NIH funding model, and thinking about whether there are industry funders or foundations that are interested in this area. And I think that's where thinking more broadly than just a single pathogen can be very effective in terms of looking towards the future. It's something that, we keep talking about, sort of the pivot in my institution. And that I think is important, but I think we also need to recognize that there's some areas of science that are more ripe for pivoting, that have had built kind of longer term relationships with certain foundations, or those that are interested in funding research. But hopefully, if there's any folks watching this from from industry or foundation, that just please to think about how you can interact with your pediatrician scientist colleague to support the research that is so important, whether it's on HIV or cystic fibrosis or sickle cell or, any of the many, chronic conditions that are affecting children. I think that the time is more than ever, your support is needed.
That is such a great answer. And I think I also encourage from the other end, the physician scientists to think about entrepreneurial ways that they can get their innovations from the laboratory to actually become medicines in the clinic. And sometimes that means being entrepreneurial and starting startups and reaching out to industry. So I think that's really interesting. So we're going to round up with one last question, which is, what lessons have you learned in your own training, and what advice specifically do you have for trainees?
Yeah, I think, I've learned a lot over the years, in both in training and, in the course of going, climbing the faculty ranks. A couple of things I've mentioned already in terms of, not kind of waiting, having your personal life follow the path that it needs to follow at the same time as your career is following that path. I think a lot of people always, come to me and ask me, oh, what's the right time to have kids, or what's the right time to do this or that? And my answer is always, the right time is when it's right for you, and your colleagues and your career can mold itself around that. And I think to be, there were times when I was kind of not as open about, my family needs, and because I felt like I really couldn't be. And of course, when you're in training, you're not as much in control of your own time, but the physician scientist aspect of it really, I think, did facilitate more of freedom and flexibility. So that's something to think about. The other thing that we haven't really talked about so far, I think, is kind of how being a physician scientist really opens you up to a wealth of opportunities that come your way because of the dual nature of understanding the research world and understanding the clinical world. And I think it's very fashionable now to have conversations about how to say no and how to turn down things. But I actually usually tell people, at least at the starting off phase of their career, to be open to those opportunities and how to say yes, because it can really kind of change the course of your career and your trajectory to be able to be open to those opportunities, and sort of maybe you might find something that really is a passion that you didn't really know about. And that's kind of how you grow as an individual and either a clinician, a scientist, a leader. I think it's really important to do that at a certain stage. Maybe then you start to kind of think about, okay, what can I let go that I tried out and maybe wasn't for me, or what can I, transition to somebody who's more junior. But in the beginning, I think it really does help to say yes. And then finally, I think we sort of touched on this, but having that physician scientist identity and role models as well in that area. And I don't mean just MD PhD when I say physician scientist, of course. I mean, practicing clinicians who have a research program, whether that's basic, clinical, translational, implementation, et cetera. But always having the why and the physician aspect, and what's your mission? If you're studying something in the lab, where is that? What is that eventually going to lead to in kids? And you mentioned kind of being entrepreneurial and trying to actually, turn the discoveries into treatments. And I think that's so critical. It's not always easy, right? It's not always something, not every single experiment, works. And sometimes things, that process is a very long road. But again, that goes back to the team science aspect as well, because I think it's pretty rare that somebody, these days discovers a molecule, tests it in animals, designs a clinical trial, and then sees it go into patients in the course of their career, right? So I think we're kind of all built. I mean, it does happen, but most of us
It's
are
happened.
kind of most of us are sort of building off of discoveries of others and trying to carry that ball and pass it along to the next person. But staying involved in that team, I think, allows you to kind of see the fruits of your labor wherever you are along the step of that process of translation.
Sage advice. Ann Chahroudi, you are awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us. And I just want to thank everyone else who's tuned in for sharing a few moments with us. And hopefully you have enjoyed our ASCI perspectives today.
Thank you so much, Julie. This was really a lot of fun.